The rain on Xylos didn't fall. It hissed. Each drop was a tiny bead of corrosive acid, sizzling against the battered hull of the escape pod. Inside, Sergeant Jax tightened the seals on his environment suit, the low oxygen warning a soft, insistent chime in his helmet. The crash had been violent, a catastrophic failure of the transport's grav drives that had scattered debris across 100 kilometers of this forsaken planet. He was the sole survivor. Alone. The thought should have brought panic, but Jax's heart rate remained steady. He was a product of Earth, a Deathworlder, and solitude in a hostile environment was just another Tuesday. His suit's diagnostic flickered. Microfractures spiderwebbed across his left vambrace, a souvenir from the impact. The atmospheric processors were working overtime to scrub the toxic air, but the suit's power was finite. He had 72 hours, maybe less, before the planet itself would claim him. He ran a systems check, his gaze sweeping over the alien landscape through the pod's cracked viewport. The flora was a nightmare of deep purples and virulent greens. Jagged, crystalline trees clawed at a bruised sky, where two sickly moons hung like cataracts in a dying eye. The air, even filtered, smelled of ozone and decay. Survival was a series of calculations. First, shelter. Second, water. Third, salvage. He popped the pod's hatch, the hinges groaning in protest. The acidic rain immediately began to pit the metal of the frame. He moved with an economy of motion honed by years in the colonial Marine Corps, his pack secured, his pulse rifle held at a low ready. His training had been forged on worlds that actively tried to kill you, worlds where the flora was carnivorous, the fauna was hyper-aggressive, and the weather was a weapon. Xylos felt familiar. It was his Deathworlder senses that picked it up first, a faint signal cutting through the static of the storm. It wasn't a standard Terran distress call. The frequency was alien, a delicate, warbling chime. It was weak and getting weaker. His mission parameters were clear: survival and evasion until rescue. Aiding foreign nationals was not on the list, but the sound was persistent, a needle of distress in the vast emptiness. Against his better judgment, Jax oriented his helmet's compass toward the signal and began to move. The ground squelched under his magnetic boots, a thick, coppery mud that tried to suck him down with every step. He navigated by instinct, his eyes scanning not just the path ahead, but the canopy above and the ground beneath. He spotted the shimmer coil in the branches of a crystalline tree, its camouflaged skin barely visible. It was a constrictor predator that used hypnotic light patterns to lure its prey. A rookie would have walked right under it. Jax gave it a wide berth. He identified the spore pods of the whispering death fungus, which released a fast-acting neurotoxin if their root systems detected vibration. He lightened his step, moving with a grace that belied his armored frame. This was the human advantage, the inheritance of 1 billion years of evolution on a planet that never stopped inventing new ways to kill. Pattern recognition. Adaptability. The signal led him to a ravine, and at the bottom lay the source, a small, elegant shuttlecraft shaped like a polished obsidian seed. It was clearly not a military vessel. Its hull was cracked open like an eggshell, delicate silver filigree twisted and broken. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, and in the eerie quiet he heard a new sound, a soft, terrified whimpering. He slid down the muddy embankment, his rifle tracking back and forth. The shuttle's interior was a mess of shattered crystal displays and torn, velvety fabric, and huddled in the corner were two figures. They were tall and impossibly slender, their bodies covered in what looked like iridescent, chitinous plates that shifted from deep blue to silver in the dim light. Their limbs were long and delicate, ending in three-fingered hands. Their faces were heart-shaped, dominated by large, black, liquid eyes that fixed on him with abject terror. They couldn't have been much older than adolescents in human terms. They were clearly injured. The smaller of the two had a deep gash on her arm, from which a viscous, sapphire-blue fluid was sluggishly seeping. The other had her arm wrapped protectively around her companion, her own posture rigid with fear and defiance. They were speaking to each other in a rapid, melodic language, a string of clicks and soft chimes that conveyed their panic. Jax raised a hand slowly, palm open. "Easy," he said, his voice a low rumble through his helmet's external speaker. He kept his rifle pointed at the ground. "I'm not going to hurt you." The taller one flinched, pulling the other closer. Her voice, when it came through the universal translator a moment later, was thin and brittle. "Stay back, creature, creature." He'd been called worse. He took another slow step forward, his eyes doing a rapid assessment of the shuttle. The power was dead. The emergency beacon was running on its last dregs. The ship was wedged between two rock faces, but something was wrong. His gaze fell upon the thick, purple vines that had snaked their way into the wreck. They weren't just vines. They were twitching, pulsing with a faint internal light. He'd seen something similar on Tartarus V, a predatory flora that senses biosignatures. "We need to get out of here," he said, his tone sharpening with urgency. "Now, that plant is a stalker vine. It's drawn to your heat and movement." The taller alien, whose name he would later learn was Lyra, shook her head. Her iridescent plating ruffled, a sign of agitation. "We will not go with you, Deathworlder." The word hung in the air. Deathworlder, the galactic term for species forged in high-gravity, high-danger environments. It was usually spoken with a mixture of fear and disgust. Jax didn't have time for galactic politics. One of the vines began to creep closer to the smaller alien, Ilara. A barb, slick with neurotoxin, extended slowly from its tip. "Your choice," Jax said, his voice flat. "Stay here and be plant food, or come with me and live." He didn't wait for an answer. He unclipped a magnesium flare from his belt. His brain was already running the tactical simulation. The vine reacts to heat and energy signatures. A sudden, intense burst should draw its attention. While it was distracted, he'd have seconds to sever its main root system, which had to be nearby. "When I tell you to run, you run for the ravine wall. Don't stop. Understand?" he barked. Ilara whimpered, but Lyra stared at him, her large eyes wide with a confusion that was stronger than her fear. No one had ever spoken to her with such raw command. She gave a jerky, hesitant nod. "Now!" Jax yelled. He ignited the flare. It erupted with the blinding white fire of a miniature sun, flooding the shuttle with intense light and heat. As he'd predicted, the stalker vines recoiled violently, their tendrils whipping toward the flare as if drawn by a magnet. In that instant, Jax lunged. He didn't go for the vines inside the shuttle, he went for the source. His armored boot slammed into a section of the shuttle's floor, shattering the weakened composite. Beneath it, buried in the mud, was a thick, pulsating node of a root, the plant's central ganglion. His combat knife, a meter of sharpened carbon-titanium alloy, hissed from its sheath. He drove it down with all his weight and strength, severing the root in a single, decisive blow. The vines inside the shuttle went rigid, then fell limp, their inner light fading to a dull, dead purple. He turned back to the aliens. They were frozen, staring at him. He had not used a blaster or a plasma cannon. He had used a flare, a knife, and a profound, instinctive understanding of a hostile ecosystem. It was a kind of intelligence they had never witnessed. "I said run," he said, his voice softer but no less firm. He grabbed a discarded supply pack from their shuttle, slung it over his shoulder, and then scooped up the injured Ilara into his arms. She weighed next to nothing. "You," he said, nodding to Lyra. "Follow me. Move." And for the first time in her life, the elder princess of the Cathar ascendancy did exactly as she was told, scrambling after the hulking, armored creature who had just saved her from certain death. The acidic rain began to fall again, and Jax moved into the deadly wilderness of Xylos, now with two precious, fragile lives in his care. The cave Jax found was a deep fissure in a rock formation that looked like a stack of gargantuan, petrified bones. It was defensible, with a single narrow entrance and deep enough to escape the hissing rain. He laid Ilara down gently on the smooth stone floor. The younger alien was shivering, her iridescent skin flickering with a pale, sickly light. Her breathing was shallow. "Her wound," Lyra said, her voice tight with anxiety. "The vine's barb grazed her." Jax knelt, his helmet retracting with a soft hiss. The air in the cave was stale but breathable, a relief from the suit's recyclers. For the first time, the princesses saw his face. It was not the monstrous visage they might have expected. He was young, his features sharp and weathered, his gray eyes intense and focused. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, a testament to a life lived on the edge. He examined the gash on Ilara's arm. The tissue around it was darkening, the sapphire blood clotting poorly. "Neurotoxin," he muttered, more to himself than to them. His medkit was designed for human physiology, but some principles were universal. He pulled out a tube of broad-spectrum antitoxin and a canister of medical biofoam. "This might hurt," he said, meeting Lyra's wary gaze. "And I don't know how your biology will react, but if we do nothing, the venom will paralyze her respiratory system." Lyra hesitated for only a second. She had seen him outthink the stalker vine. She had seen the certainty in his movements. She nodded. "Do it." Jax worked with practiced efficiency. He administered a small dose of the antitoxin directly into the wound, watching Alara's vital signs on his suit's wrist-mounted display. Her alien heart rate, a frantic, fluttering rhythm, steadied slightly. He then sprayed the biofoam over the gash. It expanded, sealing the wound and hardening into a flexible, sterile cast. Alara let out a soft moan, and her shivering subsided. With the immediate crisis handled, Jax turned his attention to their other needs. He set down their salvaged pack and began to rummage through it. It was full of useless luxuries. Silken cloths, ornate data slates, and crystallized sweets. He did find 2 thermal blankets and a container of purified water, which he handed to Lyra. "Drink," he commanded. "Both of you. Dehydration will set in fast." Lyra accepted the container, her 3-fingered hand brushing his. His skin was warm, solid. It was a strange, unsettling sensation. Her people were lithe and cool to the touch. This human was dense, solid, a creature of gravity and pressure. While they rehydrated, Jax moved to the mouth of the cave. He gathered fallen branches of a resinous, crystalline wood that he'd identified as slow-burning. Using a friction striker from his survival kit, he coaxed a small flame to life. The fire crackled, casting a warm, dancing light across the cave walls. Lyra and Alara stared at it, their large eyes reflecting the flames. "What is that?" Alara whispered, her voice weak. "Fire," Jax said simply. He added another piece of wood. "It provides heat, light, and keeps predators away." "Uncontrolled energy release," Lyra breathed, her words a mix of academic curiosity and primal fear. "It's chaotic, primitive." "It's effective," Jax corrected. He sat back on his haunches, the firelight playing across his face. "On my world, learning to control it was the first step to becoming who we are." They fell into a tense silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the drumming of the acid rain outside. The princesses huddled together under the thermal blankets, watching the human. He was a bundle of contradictions. He moved with the brutal efficiency of a predator, yet his hands had been gentle when treating Alara. He spoke with the authority of a commander, yet he was now tending a small, simple fire as if it were the most important task in the universe. As the hours passed, Jax's body began to demand fuel. His own rations were limited. He knew the aliens likely couldn't process human food, and he needed to find them something they could eat. "Stay here. Don't leave the cave," he said, standing up. His rifle was back in his hands. "Where are you going?" Lyra asked, a new note of alarm in her voice. The thought of being left alone was more terrifying than his presence had been. "Hunting," he replied, and slipped out into the toxic twilight. He moved through the alien forest with a hunter's patience. His mind was a catalog of observations. He'd seen 6-legged grazers nibbling on a specific type of moss. He'd also seen smaller, rodent-like creatures eating the fat, white grubs that lived in the rotting husks of the crystalline trees. Following the chain, he deduced the grubs were likely a safe, high-protein food source. Anything that ate them and lived was a good sign. It was a basic survival tenet from the Deathworlder's Guide to Xenobiology. Watch what the locals eat. He found a fallen tree and, using his knife, pried back the bark. The grubs writhed underneath, each the size of his thumb. He collected a dozen in a spare pouch, his expression unreadable. Back in the cave, he skewered them on a thin shard of rock and roasted them over the fire. The smell was nutty, slightly sweet. He offered one to Lyra. She recoiled, her facial plates flattening in disgust. "You cannot be serious." "It's protein. Your bodies are weak. You need energy," Jax said patiently. "I watched a local creature eat them. It's the safest bet we have." He took one of the grubs himself and ate it without hesitation. The texture was creamy, the taste surprisingly mild. His face showed nothing. This was survival. Emotion was a liability. Alara, driven by a gnawing hunger and a growing trust in their rescuer, reached out a trembling hand. Lyra, we must. Lyra watched the human's impassive face, then looked at her sister's pale features. With a deep sigh of resignation, she took the skewer. She bit into the grub, her eyes squeezed shut. Her expression slowly changed from disgust to surprise. It wasn't pleasant, but it was fuel. They ate in silence, the act of sharing this primitive meal forging a strange, unspoken bond between the three of them. Later, as the twin moons cast long, distorted shadows across the land, Alara's breathing became ragged again. It wasn't the toxin. The air was thin, the nitrogen content too high for her species' delicate respiratory system. Her body was failing. Jax checked his suit's atmospheric sensors. He was right. The partial pressure of oxygen in the cave was just below their minimum tolerance. His own suit could compensate, but they were exposed. Panic began to flicker in Lyra's eyes. What's happening to her? The air, Jax said, his mind racing. He couldn't take them outside in the rain. He needed to find a way to enrich the oxygen in the cave. His eyes scanned the environment, his brain processing, connecting disparate pieces of information. He remembered seeing a thick green moss growing near a pool of stagnant water. On some worlds, similar organisms engaged in photosynthesis, releasing oxygen, but they needed a catalyst, light. I have an idea, he said. He took his power pack from his rifle, jury-rigging a connection to the last of the pod's emergency lamps. It was a risk, draining his weapon's power source, but the rifle was useless if his companions were dead. He went back out into the drizzle, carefully scraping blankets of the moss from the rocks and carrying them into the cave. He arranged them around the lamp, creating a small, green mound. When he switched on the lamp, its bright, clean light illuminated the moss. "What are you doing?" Lyra asked, mystified. "Encouraging them to breathe," Jax said. They waited. For an hour, nothing changed. Alara's condition worsened. Lyra began to despair. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the readings on Jax's wrist display began to tick upward. The oxygen content in the cave was rising. The moss, stimulated by the full-spectrum light, was photosynthesizing, pumping precious oxygen into their small sanctuary. Alara's breathing began to ease, the rattling in her chest subsiding. Lyra stared at Jax, her awe finally eclipsing her fear. He hadn't used advanced technology. He hadn't consulted a databank. He had observed, hypothesized, and acted. He had bent the hostile environment to his will, using nothing but his mind and a few scavenged parts. She was looking at a Deathworlder, and for the first time, she began to understand what that truly meant. It wasn't about savagery or brute force. It was about an unbreakable, relentless will to survive, and the terrifying ingenuity that came with it. "How did you know that would work?" she whispered, her voice filled with a reverence she had previously reserved for her ancestors. Jax looked at the moss, then back at her. "On Earth, everything is connected. Everything is in a constant struggle. To live, you have to learn the patterns. You have to see the whole system, not just the individual parts." He paused, his gray eyes meeting hers in the firelight. "Survival is just seeing the connections that others miss." The journey to high ground took 3 days. 3 cycles of Xylos's dim sun and twin moons. For Lyra and Alara, it was an ordeal beyond their worst imaginings. For Jax, it was a methodical, exhausting, but manageable task. He was their shield, their guide, and their engine. He taught them to walk on the balls of their feet to minimize vibrations and avoid rousing the whispering death fungus. He showed them how to read the landscape, to see the telltale signs of a predator's territory, or the subtle discoloration of the rock that indicated a stable path versus a crumbling ledge. He fashioned makeshift filtration masks for them from their own silken clothes and the activated charcoal from his water purifier, protecting their lungs from the worst of the airborne spores. His endurance was inhuman. He moved with a steady, ground-eating pace that never seemed to falter. When they had to climb, he went first, securing ropes for them. When a chasm was too wide to jump, he felled one of the smaller crystalline trees with his knife and sheer brute force, creating a bridge. He seemed to run on an internal power source that never depleted. Lyra, who prided herself on the rigorous physical conditioning of a royal, was exhausted after a few hours. Jax seemed as if he could go on forever. During the second day, they were stalked. Jax felt it before he saw it, a prickling on his neck, the instinct of a prey animal that was also an apex predator. He stopped them in the shadow of an overhang, holding up a hand for silence. "What is it?" Lyra whispered, her body tense. "Company," Jax breathed. He pointed toward a ridge 200 meters away. "Skittermaws, a pack of 6. Lyra followed his gaze. At first she saw nothing but rocks. Then her eyes adjusted and she gasped. The creatures were perfectly camouflaged, their bodies the exact shade and texture of the stone. They were low-slung, multi-limbed predators, and they were moving in a coordinated flanking pattern. Her own highly developed Cathar senses had seen nothing. The human had spotted them from a distance, despite their natural camouflage. His pattern recognition was on a level she couldn't comprehend. "They have us trapped," she said, her voice trembling. "The cliffs are on our left, a sheer drop on our right." "They think so," Jax said, his mind already working. He wasn't looking at the trap, he was looking at the way out. "They're using the terrain against us, so we'll use it against them." He led them forward, into the bottleneck the skittermaws were herding them toward. It seemed like madness, walking directly into the ambush. Lyra wanted to protest, but the quiet confidence in Jax's posture kept her silent. He stopped them behind a cluster of tall, thin rock spires that hummed with a strange energy. "When I give the signal, I want you to get behind that large boulder and stay down," he instructed, his voice low and calm. He unslung his pulse rifle. "Don't move no matter what you hear." The skittermaws closed in, their chittering calls echoing off the canyon walls. They were confident, their prey cornered. As the first one lunged, Jax didn't fire at it. He fired at the base of the resonating rock spire next to him. The high-energy pulse of the rifle struck the crystalline structure, and a deafening, high-frequency shriek erupted from the rock. The skittermaws convulsed, their sensitive auditory organs overloaded by the sonic blast. They stumbled, disoriented, their pack cohesion shattered. "Now!" Jax yelled. While the princesses scrambled for cover, Jax used the moment of confusion. He wasn't interested in a prolonged firefight. He had limited ammunition and 2 civilians to protect. He unclipped his last plasma grenade. With a practiced, fluid motion, he lobbed it not at the creatures, but at a section of the cliff face above them that he had identified as unstable. The grenade detonated with a sharp crack, and a wave of superheated plasma flash vaporized the rock. The cliff face fractured, and tons of rock and debris came crashing down, burying the disoriented predators in an avalanche of stone. The thunderous roar echoed through the canyon, and then silence. Jax was already moving, pulling Lyra and Alara from behind the boulder. "Let's go, the noise will attract other things." They half ran, half stumbled away from the scene. Lyra looked back at the rock slide, then at Jax. He hadn't just defeated the pack. He had used physics, geology, and biology as weapons. He had turned the very planet against its own inhabitants. She felt a profound chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The stories were true. Deathworlders didn't just survive hostile environments. They mastered them. They weaponized them. That night, they found shelter in a shallow cave overlooking a vast valley. The rain had stopped, and the twin moons bathed the landscape in a soft, ethereal light. Alara was asleep, her breathing deep and even, a testament to Jax's care. Lyra sat watching the human as he cleaned his rifle, his movements precise and economical. "Why are you helping us?" she asked, breaking the long silence. Jax didn't look up from his work. "My pod crashed. Your shuttle crashed. We're all just trying to get off this rock." "It's more than that," she pressed. "You risk yourself for us again and again. We are not of your species. We are strangers." Jax paused, clipping the power pack back into his rifle. He finally looked at her, his gray eyes seeming to see right through her royal facade. "Back home, we have a saying, nobody gets left behind. It doesn't matter who you are, you're in trouble, you help. It's my duty." Duty? The concept was not foreign to her, but it was tied to lineage, to oaths, to political alliances. His duty seemed to be to a code that transcended all of that. This code. Is it common among all humans? "Among the ones worth knowing," he said. He leaned back against the cave wall, a weariness finally settling into his features. "Earth is a hard place, princess. It forges you. You either learn to work together to pull the other guy out of the mud, or you all die. We had a history of fighting each other. We nearly wiped ourselves out. We learned, the hard way, that the universe is dangerous enough without making enemies of your neighbors." Lyra processed this. The terrifying Deathworlders, the galaxy's Boogamen, were cooperative. Their strength didn't just come from their resilience, but from a deeply ingrained social instinct to protect even the weakest among them. It was a revelation that shook the very foundations of her understanding of the galaxy. She felt a debt that could never be repaid, and with it, a need for honesty. "There is something you must know, Sergeant." "Jax," he corrected her. "My name is Jax." "Jax," she repeated, the name feeling foreign but right on her tongue. "We are not merchants or low-level diplomats." She took a deep breath, her iridescent skin shimmering. "My name is Lyra Valeriana Cathar. This is my sister, Ilara Celestine Cathar. We are the daughters of the Empress Valeriana, the supreme ruler of the Cathar ascendancy." Jax's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. He was silent for a long moment, the information sinking in. He, a sergeant in the colonial marines, had just rescued the two most precious individuals in an empire that spanned 1,000 star systems. This went far beyond a simple rescue operation. This had political implications that could ripple across the galaxy. "Our shuttle was sabotaged," Lyra continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A rival faction within the court. They wanted to destabilize my mother's rule. They left us here to die." She looked at him, her large, dark eyes holding an intensity that mirrored his own. "And you, a lone human, refused to let that happen. When we are rescued, my mother will want to see you. She will want to reward you." Jax stared out at the alien landscape, his mind a whirlwind. He wasn't a hero. He was a soldier. He followed orders. He survived. This was a complication of an entirely different magnitude. "Let's focus on getting rescued first," he said, his voice a low growl. "We reach the summit tomorrow. We get your beacon working. The rest can wait." But he knew it couldn't. The moment he'd pulled them from that shuttle, his simple life as a soldier had ended. He was now entangled in the fate of an alien empire, a fate that rested, for now, in his calloused, human hands. The final climb was a vertical sheet of jagged rock and slippery moss. A cutting wind whipped through the pass, threatening to tear them from their holds. Jax went first, as always. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a master climber, finding handholds and footholds that were nearly invisible. He hammered pitons into the rock, securing a line for the princesses. He had to physically assist Ilara, her strength all but gone. He looped a rope around her waist and half pulled, half carried her up the rock face, his own muscles screaming in protest. Lyra followed, her initial pride replaced by a grim determination to not be a burden. When they finally hauled themselves over the summit's edge, they collapsed, gasping for air. But the sight that greeted them stole what little breath they had left. They were on the highest peak for kilometers around. The whole of Xylos spread out below them, a breathtaking panorama of lethal beauty. Purple forests, glowing rivers of what Jax guessed was some kind of bioluminescent algae. And in the distance, the skeletal remains of a city so ancient it seemed to have grown from the planet itself. Their shuttle's emergency beacon was a small, silver dish. Jax took the power cell he had salvaged and carefully connected it. He bypassed the damaged systems, routing the power directly to the transmitter. With a flick of a switch, a low hum filled the air. A thin beam of energy, invisible to the naked eye, shot up into the bruised sky. "It's active," he said, slumping against a rock. He was finally feeling the cumulative exhaustion of the past few days. "Now we wait." They didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, a shadow fell over them. It wasn't a ship that descended from the clouds, it was a mobile palace. A Cathar Imperial cruiser, a vessel over a kilometer long, shaped like a majestic, multi-winged raptor. Its hull was the color of pearl, and it moved with an impossible, silent grace. It dwarfed anything in the human fleet. A ramp lowered and a squadron of guards emerged. They were clad in ornate silver armor, carrying long, elegant rifles that hummed with contained energy. Their movements were precise, disciplined. They saw the princesses, and a collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through their ranks. Then they saw Jax. Their rifles immediately snapped up, all aimed at his chest. Their postures became aggressive, their iridescent plating flaring in a clear threat display. "Hold," Lyra's voice rang out, no longer the timid whisper of a frightened girl, but the clear, commanding tone of a future empress. She stepped in front of Jax, shielding him with her own body. "This human is under my personal protection. He is our savior. Lower your weapons." The captain of the guard, a tall Cathar with markings of high rank on his armor, hesitated, his gaze fixed on Jax with a mixture of suspicion and disbelief. "Your Highness, that is a Deathworlder. They are notoriously dangerous and unpredictable." "This Deathworlder," Alara added, her voice stronger than it had been in days, "did what your entire fleet could not. He kept us alive. He is a hero of the Ascendancy, and you will treat him as such." The captain, stunned by the ferocity of their defense, slowly lowered his rifle and gestured for his men to do the same. He gave Jax a long, searching look, his eyes lingering on the human's scarred face, his worn gear, and the sheer, unyielding presence he exuded. He bowed stiffly. "As you command, your Highnesses." Stepping onto the Imperial cruiser was like stepping into another reality. The air was perfectly filtered, scented with a faint, floral aroma. The lighting was soft, shifting in hue to match the occupants' moods. The gravity was a gentle, consistent 1G, a luxury after the variable, crushing forces of the crash. Jax felt clumsy and uncivilized, his mud-caked armor and gritty survival gear a stark contrast to the pristine, elegant surroundings. He was escorted to a medical bay that was more like a spa, where silent, efficient droids tended to his minor injuries and decontaminated his suit. He was then shown to a suite of rooms that were larger than his entire barracks back on the orbital station. A bed of soft, self-warming fibers, a sonic shower, and a replicator that could produce any clothing he desired. He chose a simple, dark gray utility uniform. It felt more honest than the silken robes offered. A high-ranking official, a wizened Cathar named Xyler, came to debrief him. The old alien was courteous, but his questions were pointed, probing. He wanted to know every detail of their survival. As Jax recounted the events, the stalker vine, the fire, the hunt for grubs, the oxygen-producing moss, the sonic attack on the skittermaws, Xyler's polite facade slowly crumbled, replaced by an expression of profound astonishment. You did all this with only your standard issue gear and a knife?" Xyler asked, his voice barely a whisper. "And my training," Jax replied. "This training," Xyler said, leaning forward. "The Ascendancy has fought wars. We have conquered worlds, but we have never produced soldiers who could do what you have done. Your species. You are spoken of in military archives as a theoretical apex threat. A species so adaptable, so resilient, that to engage you in a ground war on a world of your choosing would be strategic suicide. I am beginning to believe the archives did not exaggerate." Before Jax could respond, the doors to his suite slid open. Lyra and Alara entered. They had been cleaned and dressed in flowing, formal robes of deep indigo. Their injuries were healed, their natural vitality restored. They looked every bit the royalty they were. "Xyler, leave us," Lyra commanded softly. The old official bowed and departed without a word. "We are approaching the capital," Lyra said, her gaze steady. "You will be brought before our mother, the Empress." "She wishes to thank you personally," Alara added, a hint of her earlier warmth returning. "We told her everything. She finds it hard to believe." "Look, princesses," Jax said, feeling profoundly out of his depth. "Your Highnesses, I'm just a soldier. I did my job. A thank you is plenty. Just point me to the nearest human embassy or military outpost, and we can all get on with our lives." Lyra stepped closer. "Jax, you don't understand. You didn't just do your job. In our culture, a life debt is the most sacred bond that can exist. You saved the lives of the royal heirs. You have, by your actions, permanently altered the course of our empire. You cannot simply get on with your life. Your life is now intertwined with ours." The ship shuddered slightly as it broke through the atmosphere of Cathera, the imperial homeworld. On the large viewport, a city of impossible beauty came into view. Crystalline spires taller than mountains pierced the clouds, connected by bridges of solid light. Floating gardens drifted serenely through the sky, trailing waterfalls that glittered in the light of a gentle, golden sun. It was a civilization at its zenith, peaceful, powerful, perfect. And Jax, the grub-eater, the fire-maker, the creature of mud and violence, was about to be presented to its queen. The throne room was designed to inspire awe, and it succeeded. The ceiling was a dome of living crystal that showed the starscape outside in real time. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting the light from glowing pillars that pulsed with a soft, internal energy. And at the far end, upon a throne that seemed carved from a single, massive diamond, sat the Empress Valeriana. She was ancient and imposing, her chitinous plating the color of aged gold, etched with the faint lines of centuries of life. But there was no frailty in her. Her posture was straight, her gaze sharp and intelligent. Her presence filled the vast room, a palpable aura of power and absolute authority. Lyra and Alara stood beside her, looking small and young in comparison. Jax walked the long path to the throne, his footsteps the only sound in the silent hall. The assembled court, a gallery of highborn Cathar in their finest robes, watched him with unconcealed curiosity and suspicion. He was the beast from the wilderness, the Deathworlder brought into their sanctuary. He stopped a respectful distance from the throne and stood at ease, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture military straight. Sergeant Jackson of the Terran Colonial Marines. The Empress's voice was deep, melodic, and carried without any need for amplification. My daughters have told me a story I find difficult to reconcile with reality. They say a single being of a lesser-known species saved them from the horrors of Xylos, a planet our own rescue teams deemed unsurvivable. They are alive, Empress. That is the only reality that matters, Jax replied, his voice calm and steady. The Empress leaned forward slightly, her dark eyes narrowing. They tell me you made fire from sticks, that you fed them insects, that you used sound as a weapon and plants as life support. These are not the actions of a technologically advanced soldier. They are the skills of a primal survivor. Where I come from, Empress, they are the same thing, Jax said. Technology can fail, the will to live and the knowledge of how to do so cannot. A murmur went through the court. The Empress silenced it with a flick of her hand. She dismissed the court, leaving only herself, her daughters, and Jax in the cavernous hall. The silence that followed was heavy. I have reviewed the human historical archives available to us, the Empress said, her tone now more conversational, more analytical. Your species is remarkable. You have endured ice ages, supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts. You have fought wars with weapons that could crack your own planet, and you survived. You poison your own air and water, and you adapt. You are born into a world that is a constant, brutal contest for survival. Every one of you is the descendant of 1 billion generations of winners in that contest. She rose from her throne and glided toward him. She was taller than he was, her presence overwhelming. My people, she said, gesturing to the empty hall, have known peace for 10,000 years. We are advanced, enlightened, powerful, but we are soft. We have forgotten how to struggle. The attempt on my daughters' lives proves that our enemies see this weakness. My line is strong, but it lacks an essential element, an element you seem to possess in abundance. Jax remained silent, waiting. He had no idea where this was going, but he knew it was the crux of the entire matter. Sergeant Jackson, the Empress said, stopping directly in front of him. A life debt of this magnitude cannot be repaid with wealth or titles. Such things are meaningless to a being like you. There is only one reward, one pact, that would be worthy of what you have done. She paused, her dark eyes locking onto his. I have ruled for 500 years. My time of childbearing is nearing its end. I must secure the future of my line and of my empire. I require a consort. One who can introduce new strength, new resilience, new ferocity into the royal bloodline. A strength that will echo for 1,000 generations. Jax's mind went blank for a second. He must have misheard. The translator must be malfunctioning, but the Empress's expression was deadly serious. I am asking you, Sergeant Jax of Earth, to become my royal consort, to be the father of the next generation of Cathar rulers. The silence in the throne room was absolute. Lyra and Alara watched him, their expressions unreadable. Jax stared at the alien Empress, the ruler of 1,000 worlds, who was proposing not just marriage, but a genetic alliance that would change the future of her species. He thought of his life. The sterile barracks, the endless drills, the brief, brutal firefights on forgotten moons. A life of service and solitude. He looked at the Empress, at her ancient wisdom and immense power. He looked at Lyra with her fierce pride and newfound respect. He looked at Alara with her gentle spirit and trusting heart. He was a Deathworlder, a creature of chaos and survival. And this perfect, orderly, peaceful civilization wanted him at its very heart. It was terrifying. It was insane. And it was the most interesting thing that had ever happened to him. The proposal echoed in the silent chambers of his mind long after he had been escorted back to his luxurious quarters. Royal Consort. It was a title so far removed from his reality as a non-commissioned officer that it felt like a line from a child's fantasy tale. He paced the room, the plush carpeting failing to soften his heavy, agitated steps. He was a tool, a weapon forged by the Terran military. He understood chain of command, mission objectives, and acceptable losses. He did not understand courtship rituals, political marriages, or the dynastic needs of a 1,000-year-old alien empress. The doors slid open to admit Lyra and Alara. They had dismissed their attendants, a breach of protocol that underscored the gravity of the situation. Lyra's formal demeanor was still in place, but her eyes held a new uncertainty. Alara, however, looked at him with an open, earnest curiosity. "You are troubled," Lyra stated, her voice soft. "Troubled?" Jax let out a short, harsh laugh. "Princess, your mother just asked a stray dog she found on the street to sire her next litter of prize winners. Troubled doesn't even begin to cover it." "That is an inaccurate and disrespectful analogy," Lyra chided, though there was no heat in her words. "She is not offering you a brief biological function. The role of consort is one of immense honor and influence. You would be her partner, her advisor." "He would be family," Alara added quietly. She took a step closer, her large, dark eyes full of an emotion he couldn't quite name. "When we were in that cave, you made us feel safe. I have lived my entire life surrounded by guards and security fields. I have never felt as secure as I did when you were tending that simple fire." Her words disarmed him more than any weapon could have. He stopped pacing and looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw not a princess, but a young woman who had faced death and found an unexpected protector. "This is not about safety," Jax argued, his voice losing its harsh edge. "It's about genetics. Your mother said it herself. She wants to breed Deathworlder traits into your bloodline." "And is that so terrible?" Lyra countered, her chin held high. "She sees the future. She sees the threats on the horizon. Our civilization prizes intellect, art, and philosophy. We have forgotten the value of tenacity, of the ability to stand on a crumbling precipice and not only refuse to fall, but to build a fortress there. You have shown us that value. My mother does not choose her consorts for love, Sergeant. She chooses them for the good of the ascendancy. This is the highest compliment she can pay you. She believes the future of our people would be better with a human element in it." Jax sank into a chair that molded itself to his form. He ran a hand over his face. "I'm a soldier. I have a duty to the colonial marines. I can't just abdicate my life." "Could you truly go back?" Lyra asked, her question sharp and perceptive. "After this, could you return to taking orders, to fighting meaningless skirmishes on barren worlds, knowing that you were offered the chance to help guide the course of a galactic empire?" He didn't have an answer for that. She was right. The thought of returning to his old life, a life he had never questioned before, now felt small, constricting. He looked between the two princesses. He had saved them, and in doing so, they had shown him a world of possibilities he had never dreamed existed. His contemplation was interrupted by a sharp chime at the door. A male Cathar, clad in the severe, dark robes of a high minister, stood there. His features were sharp, his plating a dull, unpolished bronze. He looked at Jax with unconcealed contempt. "Lord Kalen," Lyra said, her voice turning cold and formal, "your presence is unexpected." "I came to speak to the guest," Kalen said, his eyes never leaving Jax. "The court is buzzing with the Empress's ill-advised pronouncement. I felt it was my duty to offer some perspective." He stepped into the room, his arrogance a palpable force. "Deathworlder, you should understand your position. You are a novelty, a curiosity. The Empress is old, perhaps her judgment falters. This proposal is an insult to the noble houses of the Cathar who have guided this empire for millennia." "My mother's judgment is absolute, Kalen," Lyra snapped, stepping between them. Kalen ignored her, his gaze locked on Jax. "Take the offered riches, accept a ship, a title on some forgotten outpost, but refuse the position of consort, refuse it and leave Cathara, for your own health. A creature like you would not last long in the intricate dance of our court. There are accidents, far more subtle than the ones you might find in the wild. The threat was unmistakable. Jax rose slowly to his feet. He was shorter than the Cathar noble, but broader, more solid. He met Kaelin's gaze without flinching. "Are you threatening the guest of the Empress, Lord Kaelin?" Jax asked, his voice deceptively mild. Kaelin sneered. "I am offering sound advice to a primitive who has stumbled into a world he cannot possibly understand." Jax took a single step forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't clench his fists, but the atmosphere in the room changed. The practiced political menace of the courtier suddenly seemed fragile and insignificant in the face of the quiet, absolute lethality that emanated from the human. Kaelin had threatened him. To a Deathworlder, a threat was not a political maneuver. It was a prelude to violence. It was a line being drawn. "I understand this," Jax said, his voice a low growl. "I understand that a predator, no matter how well-dressed, is still a predator, and I understand that my entire life has been about dealing with predators." He held Kaelin's gaze for a heartbeat longer. "Thank you for your advice, Lord. I'll be sure to give it the consideration it deserves." Kaelin, for all his arrogance, was not stupid. He recognized he was in the presence of something his life of privilege had not prepared him for. He took an involuntary step back, gave a curt, jerky bow, and departed. The silence he left behind was profound. Ilara looked at Jax with wide, frightened eyes. Lyra, however, was looking at him with a new, fiery admiration. He had faced down one of the most powerful and dangerous nobles in the Empire, and had not yielded an inch. The encounter with Kaelin had clarified things for Jax. This wasn't just about a marriage proposal anymore. It was about survival again. The Empress was right. Her people were soft. Men like Kaelin, who used poison and treachery as their weapons, were a symptom of that softness. They thrived in the shadows because there was no one to challenge them in the light. He knew what he had to do. He requested another audience with the Empress, this time, alone. He found her not in the throne room, but in a private observatory at the apex of the highest spire. The star-dusted arms of the galaxy swirled around them, projected in stunning detail. "You have made your decision, Sergeant?" the Empress asked, her back to him as she gazed at a swirling nebula. "I have," Jax said. "I accept your proposal, but I have conditions." The Empress turned, one of her thin eyebrows raised in amusement. "A being in your position sets conditions." "A partner does," Jax countered, his voice firm. "You did not ask for a pet or a biological sample. You asked for a consort, a partner. So these are my terms. I will not be a figurehead confined to the palace. I will be your royal protector, with the authority to oversee the training and readiness of your royal guard. I will teach them what I know. I will make them stronger. I will teach them to survive, not just to fight." He took a breath. "Second, your daughters, they will learn from me as well. They are the future of your empire. They need to understand what you already know, that strength isn't just about fleets and armies. It's about the will to live when everything is trying to kill you. I will teach them to make fire from sticks. I will teach them to see the predator in the shadows. I will make them Deathworlders in mind, if not in body." He paused, his gaze unflinching. "And my final condition, Lord Kaelin and those like him, the rival faction. I will deal with them, my way. You will give me the authority and the resources to hunt the rot from your court, and you will not question my methods." The Empress Valeriana was silent for a full minute, her ancient, intelligent eyes studying him. He was not asking for wealth. He was not asking for power for its own sake. He was asking for responsibility. He was asking for the right to protect the family he was being invited to join. He was asking to do what he was born to do, to be the shield, the hunter, the one who stands on the wall and faces the darkness. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face, a rare and startling sight. "Your conditions are more than I could have hoped for." She glided toward him and extended her long, three-fingered hand. "I once read that your species sealed pacts by clasping hands, a gesture of trust and mutual defense." Jax looked at her offered hand, then back to her face. He was a sergeant from a forgotten corner of the galaxy. She was the ruler of 1,000 worlds. They were from opposite ends of the universe, products of wildly different evolutionary paths. But in that moment they understood each other perfectly. They were both survivors. He took her hand. His warm, solid grasp enveloped her cool, slender one. It was a pact. A promise. The beginning of a new age for the Cathar ascendancy, an age to be forged in the heart of a human Deathworlder. Outside, the galaxy turned, oblivious to the momentous alliance that had just been sealed in the quiet darkness of the High Observatory. The story of Jax, the royal consort, had just begun.